My name is Peter Bruchetti, and I'm a writer for Whistleblower News Network, and we're very excited to host this webinar on the Foia Freedom of Information Act with Steve Kohn, who is a leading whistleblower lawyer and partner at Kohn Colapinto. So today he's going to run us through how to navigate Foia, how to apply for Foia, make a request of the government for information, and then also, if that's been denied, if there are issues with that request, how to go back and make an appeal. All right, and so without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Steve. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Whistleblower Network News, for this opportunity to give a little training on the use of the Freedom of Information Act. So we've put up the slide. Can we put up the PowerPoint, please?
Yes.
And so I have a PowerPoint that will be online when this is over. And the PowerPoint, do I need the screen that you have here on the right-hand corner, Peter, or can we just make the PowerPoint the full thing?
I think the PowerPoint is the full thing.
There it is. I got it. Okay.
And one more thing, if I could really quickly.
Sure.
So the way we're going to structure this is Steve is going to speak for about 20 minutes and do sort of an introduction and roll through all the most important points. But then we're going to have about 20 to 15 minutes for questions. So if anyone in the presentation has a question that they would like to ask, please put that in the chat, type that question in the chat, and then I will read it and Steve will respond to it at the end of the session. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, Steve. Go ahead.
Great. So Freedom of Information Act is a key tool for journalists, whistleblowers, citizens. It was passed in 1966. You can see this. Next slide, please. It was highly controversial when it was passed, but finally went through. And this is the quote from John Musk, the principal sponsor of the Freedom of Information Act. And you can see what they say. It's pretty straightforward. Secrecy, distortions, omissions, and lies can keep people in the reins of government for years, decades, generations. So next slide, please. If we can do the next slide.
Sorry.
So this really summarizes the whole purpose behind the Freedom of Information Act. Now go one slide back up, Mr. Moss again. Yeah, this is it. A democracy without the free and truthful flow of information from the government to its people is nothing more than an elected dictatorship. That's his position, and that's why the Freedom of Information Act is passed. Without information, truthful information about the government's doing, the voters have no way of voting. They have no way of judging their leaders. Next slide, please. So the FOIA creates a presumption that every document held by the United States government is open to public inspection and that anyone can request any document. It's that simple. And this, I think it's critical for, especially for journalists to understand this. Any document by any person for any reason Now, obviously, that's not how it works in practice, because there's exemptions and bureaucracy and a lot of stuff. We'll outline some of the main impediments. But you have to understand the basic framework to use it properly and not be intimidated by it. Any document by any person for any reason. So to summarize, all you need to say is this. You have to identify the agency you're looking for documents. You have to tell them what you're looking for and ask in writing. So you're simple as that. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is the statute. If you ever want to read the Freedom of Information Act, you can just stick in Google 5 U.S.C. 552, and you'll find resources to find it. As I originally said, it was passed in 1966, but watch what happened. Did the executive branch of the United States want this to work? So the FOIA covers the executive branch, not Congress, not the courts, but it covers the Department of Justice, the Food and Drug Administration, Border Patrol, all the branches of the US government. So guess what? This is no surprise. The law was passed in '66, lots of nice press releases, people all had a party, and then they created the bureaucratic delays. Oh, you want a document? Give me $1,000 to search for it. Oh, you want a document? It'll take us 5 years to find it. Oh, one word on your document you're searching for is classified, so we will withhold the entire report, even though just one word in the entire 500-page report is classified. So the '66 law did not work. Set up the foundation. Next slide, please. So then you had the Watergate scandal. And what we now know as the Freedom of Information Act is really the 1974 amendments to the Freedom of Information Act. And here's the basic framework right here. Making a request is simple. File it with the agency, describe it. Now, the government can charge fees, but guess what? They put in a fee waiver provision. And people who can show a public interest need. If it's a commercial request from a company, you won't get a fee waiver. Also, to fight back on the delays, Congress first put very strict time limits. They were supposed to give you all your records in 10 days. The current law, as amended, says they're supposed to give you all your records in 20 days. Well, we know that's not possible because there's just too many requests, not enough resources. So there's a provision to expedite if you meet the qualifications. So to try to summarize the Freedom of Information Act in the best way I can, in writing, best description of what you're looking for to the appropriate agency, and most likely try to qualify for a fee waiver and expedited processing. Next slide, please. The law was designed to be very easy to use, and the government has, and you'll see it on our resources page, very good websites that explain how to use it. One of them is foia.gov. That should be on the resources page. Next slide, please. So this is how simple it is. Dear Department of Justice, pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act request, I hereby want all files on, make it up. What are you doing? What are you researching or doing a story on? Like all files on the prosecution of XYZ Lumber Company for illegally importing protected lumber to the United States. Well, that's telling you, now you've got the agency and you have your documents. It's telling you there's probably going to be a lot of documents there, so maybe you make it a little more easy, such as, I would like all letters from Congress to the Department of Justice urging that this company not be prosecuted. Because you want to do your researches maybe on a congressman using lobbying power to try to get someone off the hook. You just made it up. Every agency has their simple to find because they have to publish them. Next slide, please. So if you go to the Department of Health and Human Services, they will have a Foia website. Most likely you can go on that website. They will describe the way their process works. And most offices now have an online request form. When I started doing this back in 1979, I had to go make photocopies, put stamps on letters. It was a Now you can go right online in almost every agency, fill out the request online, press send. Next slide, please. The following set of slides all come from the House of Representatives report on the Foia, and they're linked. There's a couple fantastic reports that describe the entire law. The problem with the government reports and all other reports on Foia, to be honest, is get too complicated. What is key is to keep it simple. And then you deal with the government's bureaucracy. So for example, you send your Foia and they write back and say, oh, this is going to take 6 months to find this document. Well, you have two choices. You can file for expedited processing, which you should, and you can narrow your request through a negotiation to try to get quickly what you're actually looking for. Obviously, the other thing is there are exemptions. They can withhold certain documents. They'll have to tell you every document they're withholding or the categories and why. Next slide, please. Here it is. This is how to do it. Request must reasonably describe the records sought. You should be careful. So for example, say you want to do a FOIA for the Department of Defense, their records on the Hiroshima bombing. That's it, that you could actually file. Now, I don't know how long it will take them to get you those records or how much money. So you can see it's going to be a problem. But if you went to, say, photograph, you want to see a photo of a specific hospital that was, say, blown up. Now you've made your request simpler and easier and not that many documents. Then they may write back to you and say, documents on this hospital can be found in these 6 different places. Which do you want? And you can narrow it. You can be very specific to what you're looking for. Now, I've gotten tens of thousands of pages of documents. That's kind of interesting. But some of the better ones I've done have been for like one specific report, emails coming out of one specific office, where you do your research first and you try to use the FOIA to get the really interesting information as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. And this is saying pretty much the exact same thing. Make them specific, narrow it, move quickly, less expensively. You want to think about your FOIA before you file it. Next slide, please. So we'll just walk right through it quick. This is it's just obvious. Where do you file it? You file it with the agency you think has the document. Now, guess what? You can file the same FOIA to 10 different agencies, but you just have to identify the agency and the document. And as it says here, there is no place. There's no like office of the government where you submit your FOIA. Each agency, and the larger agencies often have 10, 15 different FOIA offices or programs for their different agencies. For example, the Department of Justice, there's going to be one for FBI. There's going to be one for frauds. There's going to be one for judicial appointments. There's going to be all different types of agencies within one agency. All of it is online. All of it is explained. Next slide, please. In writing, pretty much send it any way they tell you you can. You can always mail it, but I would say online is the way to do it now. Next slide, please. This is where things start getting interesting. Fee waiver. The law now says if your request takes less than 2 hours to find the document, it's under 100 pages, you're supposed to get an automatic fee waiver. But you can get a fee waiver if they're going to give you 100,000 documents. And you can get a fee waiver if it's going to take them a year to find it. This is the standard right here. Disclosure of the information is in the public interest because it is likely to contribute significantly to public understanding of the operations of government. Additionally, you have to be in a position to deliver on this promise. All because it may help people understand government. If it's just coming into my living room, it doesn't help anybody. So part of the fee waiver is to show that you're able to get the information the government gives you and get it to the public. That's why journalists are in a fantastic position to get fee waivers. Next slide, please. And the next slide should be on expedited processing when we come to it. And again, expedited processing and fee waiver, those are the two keys. That's what will delay your request, but that's what will get you the information quickly. And once again, you can see the standard for an expedited processing is pretty much the same as getting a fee waiver, but a little more information. You have to be able to disseminate the information. Now they're looking for a sense of urgency. The case law is pretty good on urgency. Meaning it doesn't mean something's about to happen tomorrow and you have to get it done today. It means essentially matters of the public interest which are unfolding in the public now. And pretty much if you're writing a story on it, then someone's figured out there's a public interest and a need to get that information out fairly quickly. So every agency has their own rules, exactly how they define expedited processing. You read their rule and you conform to that requirement. Next one, please. We discussed this about the small amounts. And one thing with the PowerPoints I always put together, I try to have all the information you need in the PowerPoint because we generally never can cover it all in the webinar. Next slide, please. As I said, they put timing requirements, 20 days now, and there's very specific requirements. You follow those, you write your appeals, and you can go to court if you need to in about 60 days. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, there are specific, most of them are common sense. National security, confidential informant, trade secrets. They're all listed out, very fairly reasonable. Some agencies will hide behind the exemptions, and you have to appeal and sometimes take them to court. Next slide, please. And there are state and local FOIAs. Now, every state has their own version, so it's not just to the federal government, but you have to look that up under state law. Next slide, please. Now we're going to walk through a FOIA, and then we'll take questions and answers. So, very straightforward. This is just the beginning of your FOIA request. Agency head, just some, or just Freedom of Information Officer, name the agency, FOIA. Now, again, you might be doing all this online. And here it is. This is a request under FOIA. Please give me a copy. Identify the information as specific as possible. That's it. FOIA's done. Send. Okay, next slide, please. Optional included seeking a fee waiver. So, I have never submitted a FOIA without asking for a fee waiver. Do it in the initial request. And here it is. Disclosure of the requested information is in the public interest, likely contribute to the significant understanding, not primarily in commercial interest. This language comes directly from the statute. And then include specific details, lay out this principle, and then say why. So, for example, I did a FOIA to Fish and Wildlife Service. I wanted their rules on giving the criteria for giving awards to whistleblowers. So I asked for the criteria. I think it's urgent because there's an extinction crisis. An article is going to be written. We need to inform whistleblowers of the need and these rules. You can come up with other arguments. You just have to lay it out, and there's a very strong chance you will get the fee waiver. If you're a journalist, you almost always should get a fee waiver. Next slide, please. And here it is for expedited processing. Same thing. I hereby request to receive expedited processing. Just stick it in your letter, no matter what, if you ask me. Their delays in FOIAs can be years. When this was, there'd be any FOIA requests, as there are thousands and thousands. It took everyone by surprise. Most people don't know, but the #1 user of FOIA are corporations, because they can go in and file a FOIA on all the contract bidding. Who got the contract? I want to do a FOIA for everything to do with this contract. So if I bid on it a year from now, I know, maybe I can write a better bid. Corporations are the #1 users of FOIA. That's why they got excluded from fee waivers. And it's also, there's thousands filed. In fact, the FOIA has become a major government bureaucracy. Every agency has an office, numerous employees, sometimes more than one office. These folks, they're inundated. That's why negotiating with them makes a lot of sense. They will want to close the FOIA out. So if you can get what you need without them having to go crazy and spend thousands of hours, everybody's a winner. So you want to get onto expedited. The other thing about expedited, they're going to have usually two categories, even for expedited: easy, fast, and one that your request is extremely complex and requires many documents and many searches. So you might get expedited, but you still may have to wait a year. And as a journalist, do you want to wait a year? Well, maybe, but you also may want to figure out how to get stuff quickly. And again, this is just lays out the standard, and then you in the blanks. But if you get serious on this, meaning you file the appeal, you must read the regulations of the agency. They will tell you some agencies require this request to be expedited under oath. You may want to do a separate affidavit. They have very specific rules. That again, but don't let these more specific rules interfere with just get you filed and start the process and negotiate. If you want to have like this fantastic FOIA, with answering all the questions on expedited processing before it'll take you weeks. Also, in the negotiating process, you may get information from the agency about what you may need to say, the magic words to get your FOIA expedited. Next slide, please. And after this, it's essentially goodbye. A FOIA request can be, on a half piece of paper. So and here it is. Thank you. I always put in, I look forward to hearing from you within 20 days as the law stipulates. I always say that. Now it says here your telephone number and your email addresses are optional. You should definitely, these FOIA officers will be responsive if they think they can work something out. You want to have a dialogue. Next slide, please. If we can get to the next one, I think we're pretty much done with the PowerPoint. Next slide, don't need this one. It just tells you who I am. And I've been doing FOIA since 1979, had many successful lawsuits, contact information. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And the old next one, maybe it's. To it. Next one, please. This is just information on the PowerPoint about who we are, how to get more information, or general, but if you can go to the next one, it looks like, and go to so the resources page is not on this. Looks that way. Hit the next one. Is this the end of it, Peter?
Yeah, this is the end of it.
Okay, well, we do have a resource page which we will post, but we can take the PowerPoint down now and I can answer questions.
Okay. All right, so if anyone would like to post any questions that they may have in the chat, we have a few from before the meeting, but if anyone would like to post anything in the chat, that would be awesome. We'd love to have your questions, and we'd love for Steve to be able to answer them. So we'll just take 1 second for people to type in a question, and then we'll start.
And while I'm waiting for the questions, what I would just like a great website to go to is literally just, I'll find it for you. If you just go on to Google and put in Freedom of Information Act, US government, boom, you're going to find tons of information. The US Department of Justice has a website just on FOIA, a website with all the cases. They have a digest where they analyze all the judicial cases. And again, this will kill you. It'll go on for page after page after page. Don't get caught up in it. If you're in an issue, a specific issue arises, then you want to go to the digest and look at how some of the courts have been deciding these issues. But to me, the FOIA, the biggest mistake people make in FOIA is, one, not understanding how simple it is, and two, not understanding purpose behind it. The presumption of access to government information. That is your right. That is, without a doubt, when Congress passed the FOIA, they wanted to open up the records of the government, the most controversial records of the government, the Vietnam War, Watergate. You know, they wanted to open up all the information that politicians they find embarrassing. They wanted to limit the ability of the government to hide. And then the law was amended because as democracy put up stumbling blocks, and some of that is just a lack of resources, some clearly intentional. They then amended the law to give the public, the people, the ability to get over these stumbling blocks. The two biggest ones, delay and money. I'll never forget, I did a FOIA as a student journalist, 1980. A university, I did a FOIA to the Department of Energy. I wanted to get Brown University's files on the work they did on the Manhattan Project, building the first atomic bomb in the 1940s. I didn't even know if they had done any work on it. But I was curious, and we had a little newspaper, so I just filed a FOIA to the Department of Energy. Hey, give me your documents on Brown University's work on the Manhattan Project. And the Department of Energy wrote back to me and said, thank you very much. Please remit the exact amount. It was like $10,000 to start the search. Well, I also submitted the exact same FOIA to the Department of Energy, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. As I mentioned before, many agencies have numerous offices. They wrote back to me, hi, Mr. Kohn, we found the records. We'll give them to you for free. Well, they're all classified from 1945, but we think it's kind of old and we'll put it through declassification, which they are required to do. And 2 weeks later, I get about 500 pages of documents, the entire Brown University contract and the Manhattan Project. No one had ever seen that before. No one even knew it existed, or some people did, but the public didn't know. All waived, all expedited, because it was in the public interest. And that's the same agency, one office being nice and reasonable, the other one setting up bureaucratic roadblocks. That's the trick to FOIA. Figure out how to target the damn request, make it simple, and understand you're going to get pushback, or at least prepare for it, and you know what the pushback's going to be. And I should have mentioned that before, but there's essentially a mandatory declassification process. If they come to a document and it says secret, someone's supposed to look at it, see if they can declassify it. So you, a citizen, can initiate the declassification process. You don't have to wait for the president to do that. Furthermore, this is very critical, the partial release of documents. So it's very common, you've probably seen it in the newspapers, you get a document and like everything's blacked out but one word. That's kind of crazy, but it also works in the inverse, where nothing's blacked out but one word. And that in the old law, that was the trick. They have to go page by page and do a declassification and an exemption review. Page by page, and everything they withhold, they have to black out and write a little notation. What is their exemption? And then all those exemptions. In short, you can get documents. Okay, did any questions show up yet, Peter?
Yeah, so we have a couple questions. We'll try to get through all of them. But thank you guys so much for putting those questions in the chat. We really appreciate it. So you already sort of covered the Manhattan Project, but in your experience, are there particular federal agencies whose FOIA offices are more or less difficult to deal with? And this question comes from Jeff Schweller.
Obviously, obviously the smaller agencies that get less FOIAs will be easier to deal with. But it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. And don't be afraid of the larger, more bureaucratic agencies. What I have discovered over time, there's definitely a check the box attitude that these agencies will be monitored and their performance judged on the number of FOIAs they process and the speed in which they process them. So if you can submit a FOIA that can be handled pretty quickly, that's going to be good, regardless of the agency, because it'll make the agency look good when they do their report to Congress, process 7,000 FOIAs and the average of 62 days. You know, they're going to like that. So my take is I've sued many, and it's in both ways. I'll give you an example. On our big wildlife program, I did a FOIA for fish and wildlife, and very quickly expedited fee waivering up the basic information about their whistleblower program, the rules. It gave me some statistics. Then we did the next dive. We asked for every single whistleblower case, the adjudication. We wanted to see what they were doing. I already knew this would be a lot more difficult. There's a lot of documents, and they would have to review every single document and take out the name of the whistleblower and other confidential law enforcement information. So if you can see what I did there, I two separate FOIAs. One, an overview of the program, the rules, what's happening. Second, let's get down and dirty. Well, then nightmare. They didn't, you know, they were. So we did have to file a lawsuit. FOIA lawsuits can be filed. We filed our lawsuit. The judge ordered them to produce records or explain why they're not in a very short period of time. They then produced the records. We knew they weren't accurate. They weren't complete. So we appealed it. We exposed that they didn't give us all the records. They then decisions of the judge, but a status order saying, you know, please inform us as to, you know, either give them the documents in X number of days or tell us why you're not. We gave another status, you know, file your briefs. We did file a brief or two. Bottom line, they had to produce all the documents, which they did. They did it in a timely manner under the threat and the fact of the lawsuit. And here's the best part. They had to pay us, I think, $65,000 in attorney's fees. You don't get your attorney's fees until you file your lawsuit. I know I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but think of yourself as a FOIA officer, knowing that the alternative to being reasonable with the requester, possibility of a lawsuit. And the lawsuit can have very bad results for the agency. Because if I win the lawsuit, the agency must pay all attorney's fees and costs. So at the end of the day, the agency not only has to give you all the documents, they got to pay you to get them. So this again increases your leverage at the agency level. And then it's just a question of need and resources on your side, what you're willing to compromise to get your document. But that's a long way of answering this question. The answer is, I would treat every agency the same, except try to identify smaller offices that may have the document. The other trick I have done, like I did one to the Justice Department about a year ago. I did one to Justice, and I knew it would be a forever bureaucracy. But through search of newspapers, I found the name of the prosecutor who would do the case. So I sent my FOIA right to that prosecutor. Now the prosecutor's got the FOIA on his desk. The prosecutor has to submit it to the FOIA office. The FOIA office now knows who has the documents. Cut through the red tape. And then I can negotiate and I can say, yeah, just give me what this guy has. You don't have to do an agency-wide search. Just give me what Prosecutor John Smith has in his file. Get what you need. Also, it's called the follow-up. Once you get documents under FOIA, you can always read them and figure out follow-ups. Okay, I've been on long enough on that.
Okay,
First question. I'm sorry about that.
That's good. That's good. All right. So we have a question from Paige Turner. She says, do FOIA requests change under different administrations?
No. Yes, obviously who's president and political regimes are important, but FOIA has been bipartisan all the way. The offices are part of the state. They're just part of the bureaucracy. They have a job and they do it. Now, obviously, if you're hitting more controversial big pictures, like say you want to get the medical reports of the children being held in detention by at the border. Now, obviously, your request is going to get moved up. It's going to be scrutinized. You may have to go to court, something like that, because it might become politicized. However, the overwhelming majority of FOIAs are not politicized at all. The overwhelming majority of documents are either going to be in or out, fairly simple. The other interesting part is when you have a really hot FOIA, which we've had many, yes, it might become political, but that just increases your leverage. So I'll give you an example. This was a number of years ago. We were representing Fred Whitehurst at the FBI crime lab. He was blowing the whistle on all types of abuses. In the O.J. Simpson murder case, the Oklahoma City bombing case, the biggest domestic terrorism bombing, the World Trade Center bombing case. These were big ticket items. We FOIA'd them all. We wanted every single explosives case, and we listed like 15 gigantic cases. Now, there was all types of litigation going on. There was press on this. There was a big scandal about Crime Lab. So the FBI just did nothing, just froze, no documents. We went to court, demanded our documents. The judge issued what's known as a preliminary injunction, which they can do in FOIA. And the judge said, every document produced in 30 days. The FBI calls up the next day. They're in complete panic. It was the largest FOIA order in the history of the FBI. And they had 30 days to produce the documents. Well, being the nice people we are, actually understanding reality, we negotiated with them even though we had the upper hand. We identified like the 12 cases we were most interested in, and they had to produce. We were told they pretty much shut down the entire FOIA and just produced documents like crazy, thousands and thousands of pages. Again, but it was in the news. It was breaking matter. So that's the type of case that you may get a good lawyer to represent you on because it's very interesting. Win and prevail. So FOIA, like anything else dealing with the government, has this complex side. But I didn't want to mention it in my PowerPoint because it has a very easy side, very simple side to FOIA. And as the government deals with you, that's when you may have to figure out appeals, court, motions, and it gets more interesting. But the vast majority of FOIA is simple. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to try to take, I think, 2 more questions here. Try to keep it to under an hour. So J. Dale Deber says, can you discuss the legal fights that can happen? I understand a winning case requires the government to pay. We have experienced better results from agencies than others, from some agencies than others, who delay and create bureaucratic hassles. How can we avoid or at least lessen the bureaucratic resistance?
So if I understand the question, and you can rephrase it if you'd like, is it's more of a strategic question about going to court. So let's put it this way. When we file, often, if agencies don't do their job correctly in granting a fee waiver, setting up the timing, figuring out exemptions. So sometimes you may want, on the other hand, every aspect of FOIA has a statutory. You don't have to wait for the agency to make any decisions. So in 20 days, they're supposed to give you your records. If they don't, there's a mandatory appeal for a certain period of time. It might be 30 days now. They've changed those appeal dates. Once you've done that, they may not have given you any answer to any question. But once you hit your mandatory deadlines, you can file in court. And that means if they haven't properly addressed your FOIA, you have a good chance of prevailing in court. Fees, attorney's fees are not automatic. You have to meet certain criteria, but you'll generally get them if the request of the documents was in public interest and the agency didn't do their job they were supposed to, which is often common. So all I say is don't wait for an answer. Appeal every time your time limits run. Put the pressure on the agency.
Okay, awesome. That's a great answer. All right, so our last question. So a couple of questions. Can non-US citizens / residents file a FOIA? That's question 1.
Yes, there is no standing requirement. I FOIA'd the FBI manual on processing FOIA, which is kind of funny. It was a large document, and they didn't want to give it up, but they had to. And they had a whole section on prisoners filing FOIAs and how to do. And they had a section on fugitives filing FOIAs. You know, what if a fugitive files a FOIA? It's kind of funny. I don't remember what the answer was, but I thought it was funny. They were addressing it. Yeah, non-US citizens, anyone can file a FOIA. Any person.
Great. Can an urgent reason be the litigation in a separate country regarding said country's government and thus perhaps indirectly local government mistreatment of USA relevant issues?
Okay, so that's a great question. This goes what I call the private eye part of a FOIA. Your job. You want to get information about things happening worldwide. Well, what U.S. agencies may have that information? Department of State. They have many, many offices. U.S. embassies. USAID. And the U.S. Department of Defense has many things going on internationally. The FOIA only covers U.S. government executive branch. But if you think about each of the executive branch, it's extensive. Now, some popular, say, international-based FOIAs could be like an embassy did an investigation into, say, how money may have been misspent, or maybe they gave money to a foreign government and they ran an audit. and the audit found corruption. So then you can target your FOIA to. You also can use FOIAs as a backdrop to other lawsuits. So for example, this is very important. Under most whistleblower laws now, federal, the Department of Labor investigates the case. When that investigation closes, the investigation is no longer an open investigation. Open investigations are subject to an exemption. Closed investigations are treated differently. So we would always, standard course, we'd file our whistleblower case, we'd initiate a Department of Labor investigation. The Department of Labor would send us the letter giving the result, pro or con, who cared. We'd immediately file a FOIA to OSHA. We'd get the investigative notes, often the interviews, and we could then determine the strength of our case, not based on what a OSHA investigator thought. We, at the actual investigative file, and make our own determination. So you can see how it goes. This is how it just goes all the time.
Okay, I think we have time for one more quick question. Deliris Montanez asks, what do you do when they state you are a third party and don't have the right for the requested information?
No standing requirement. You, unlike other areas of law, you do not need a reason for asking for anything. Okay? So you just ask. Like, the reason comes in if you're going to get a fee waiver or expedited processing, then you sometimes have to give them information. But FOIA itself, no reason. Under FOIA, I hereby request. But let me add something. This is very, very critical. FOIA has an exemption for personal privacy. So if you submit information to the government may consider that privacy exempt. So under FOIA, moreover, if the government did something about you, such as processing a Social Security issue, anything about you, your student loans, the government has a file on you, they will withhold that information under FOIA. That's why there's something known as the Privacy Act is similar to FOIA. If it's about you, you can get it under the Privacy Act, even though it is exempt under FOIA. And Privacy Act has many other features that are make it much stronger than FOIA. You can go to court easier. You can demand the correction of records. If records harmed you economically, you can request economic damage based upon their mess up in their records. So the Privacy Act has many features. But again, if you want anything on yourself, Privacy Act. If you want anything about anything else, FOIA. If it's combined, you do both. I've done so many requests under the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act, comma, and Privacy Act. Simple as that. Well, Peter says the time. It was very nice to meet you all here on Zoom. I hope you found the seminar useful. Thank you very much for participating. Peter, thank you for hosting this. Thank you to Whistleblower Network News for putting together our first of what I paper. We'll have other seminars in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Kohn.
thank you, Steve. Thank you everyone who came and watched. And we have a lot more information on our website. So please visit us there at Whistleblower Network News. Yeah, and have a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you all. Bye.